People often say that avoidants run away from love, but maybe the reality is far more complicated. Maybe they are not running from you at all. Maybe they are running from the version of themselves that begins to appear when they are with you. When a super empath enters their world, old emotions they buried long ago start rising to the surface. What looks like rejection from the outside may actually be a painful inner battle. The obsession that sometimes follows is not necessarily about romance. It is about the soul pushing for growth and transformation. Many people see avoidance as cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable by choice. Yet their emotional distance is rarely born from cruelty or indifference. More often, it is a shield against vulnerability, a way of protecting themselves from emotional experiences that once overwhelmed them. For them, deep connection feels less like safety and more like dangerous territory they learned to avoid. Inside, there is usually a younger part that once desired closeness, openness, and genuine love. But that part may have been hurt through neglect, rejection, betrayal, or emotional abandonment. Instead of disappearing, those feelings were pushed deep into the unconscious, hidden away where they seemed safer. Then someone enters their life who changes everything. The super empath does not attract them only through kindness or affection. The connection feels deeper than that. It touches something they cannot fully explain. The empath reflects qualities the avoidant lost contact with years ago: emotional awareness, vulnerability, intuition, and a love that exists without control or manipulation. These qualities become more than attractive traits. They act as reminders of who the avoidant once was, or perhaps who they wished they could still be. Somewhere inside, they recognize a sense of wholeness, even if they cannot put it into words. This creates a pull that feels both exciting and deeply frightening. They are drawn toward the empath because the empath awakens parts of themselves that have remained hidden. At the same time, they resist because moving closer means facing the pain that caused those parts to be buried in the first place. For perhaps the first time in a long while, the avoidant feels genuinely seen, not valued for what they do or the role they play, but understood as a person with fears, wounds, and complexity. That experience wakes up an old longing for intimacy that has been sleeping beneath the surface. The empath does not demand openness or force emotional conversations. Instead, their presence quietly invites authenticity. Ironically, that gentle invitation can feel even more threatening to the avoidant. They want connection, but connection requires exposure. The thing they desire most is also the thing they fear the most, so they pull away. They disappear, create distance, change the subject, or emotionally shut down. Yet even after leaving, the impact remains. The memory of the empath lingers in their mind like an echo. It returns in dreams, random moments of reflection, or quiet nights when there is nothing left to distract them. What stays with them is not simply the person. It is the emotional reality that person introduced into their life. The empath offered a glimpse of a more authentic self, and that glimpse is difficult to forget. This is often where obsession begins. It is not necessarily an obsession with the individual themselves. It is an obsession with the parts of the self that were awakened through that connection. The empath becomes a symbol of everything the avoidant lost touch with emotionally. They become a mirror that reflects not only what is missing, but also who the avoidant might have been before fear took over. That inner conflict is not something they consciously choose. It behaves more like an old wound demanding attention. The harder they try to suppress it, the more persistent it becomes. What rises within them is the self asking to be acknowledged through the experience of finally feeling again. When an avoidant connects with a super empath, the reaction goes far beyond simple attraction. Hidden underneath emotional distance are unresolved feelings, old pain, and conflicts that were never fully processed. Over time, the avoidant builds an identity designed to keep these things contained. They may appear highly independent, logical, or detached, but beneath that structure lies a much more vulnerable emotional world. The empath naturally disrupts this balance. Their emotional honesty, sensitivity, and intuitive nature reach places the avoidant has carefully protected. They do not merely connect on a surface level. Somehow they sense what exists behind the walls. This can create deep inner tension. The avoidant becomes uneasy, restless, or confused, not because the empath is harmful, but because they are touching something true. They are awakening what psychology often describes as the shadow. The shadow contains everything people reject or hide within themselves. For avoidants, this may include their need for closeness, their fear of abandonment, their desire to love freely, and their longing to be emotionally understood. These parts are often viewed as dangerous or weak, so they remain hidden. Yet the super empath embodies these very qualities with confidence and balance. They demonstrate that emotional depth does not have to mean losing yourself. They show that compassion can exist without control, and that vulnerability can be a source of strength rather than shame. Witnessing this creates a powerful internal confrontation. The avoidant is forced to face parts of themselves they spent years ignoring. This can trigger confusion, emotional memories, or an intense urge to withdraw. Even so, their thoughts continue returning to the empath. The reason is that once the shadow has been awakened, it refuses to remain silent. It asks to be seen, understood, and integrated. The obsession, then, is not entirely about another person. It is about the emotional awakening that person represents. The empath becomes a living symbol of what the avoidant must either embrace within themselves or continue running from. The more they resist the experience, the stronger the attraction can become. The empath unknowingly holds a key to emotional freedom, not because they are perfect, but because they reflect truths that already exist within the avoidant. None of this happens intentionally. The empath is simply being who they are. Their energy speaks directly to what has been hidden. The avoidant sees someone who faces emotions honestly, who welcomes closeness instead of fearing it, and who can remain compassionate in the presence of pain. This creates something that cannot be explained through logic alone. Their fixation is rooted in an internal split. They feel shaken, not merely because they are in love, but because they are confronting opposing parts of themselves that have never been reconciled. The empath becomes both a source of healing and a trigger for old wounds. Through the relationship, unconscious material rises into awareness. Once this process begins, returning to complete emotional numbness becomes far more difficult because something essential has already been awakened. At its deepest level, the connection between the avoidant and the super empath represents an encounter between opposites. One person survives through distance and self-protection, while the other moves through life with emotional openness and deep sensitivity. Their interaction reflects a larger psychological process where conflicting inner forces seek balance and understanding. The avoidant often fears losing themselves in intimacy. They associate closeness with danger, dependence, or pain. The super empath, however, has learned how to remain emotionally present without being consumed. They can hold space for another person's struggles while maintaining their own sense of self. For someone who rarely feels truly understood, this experience can be overwhelming. The avoidant is not used to being seen on such a profound level. They are not accustomed to someone recognizing what lies beneath the defenses and responding with compassion rather than judgment. That is why the connection feels so powerful. It is not only about two personalities meeting, it is about hidden parts of the human psyche seeking reunion, about wounds asking to be healed, and about a deeper self trying, perhaps for the first time in years, to come back into the light. When these two people come into each other's lives, they create a kind of psychological tension that neither fully understands, yet both can feel. It is like an invisible force pulling them together. The attraction runs much deeper than chemistry or compatibility. It comes from needs that exist within both of them, often hidden beneath the surface. The empath, despite their strength and compassion, may carry old wounds from times when their feelings were ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood. The avoidant, on the other hand, carries the weight of learning to disconnect from their own emotions as a way to survive difficult experiences. Their connection becomes a reflection of those inner struggles. The empath naturally moves toward emotional honesty and harmony, while the avoidant instinctively steps back from that same depth. This creates a dynamic that awakens something very old and very powerful inside both people. The avoidant feels safe in the presence of the empath. Yet that safety is also frightening because it invites vulnerability and the possibility of losing control. At the same time, the empath is not drawn to the avoidant out of desperation or a need to fix them. Instead, there is often an intuitive sense that behind the walls and distance lies a person capable of great emotional depth. They recognize something valuable beneath the surface that others may overlook. Their bond becomes more than a simple relationship. On a symbolic level, it represents an attempt to bring together parts of the self that have been separated for years. The avoidant becomes deeply attached because the super empath reflects qualities they have never fully accepted within themselves. Vulnerability, intimacy, emotional trust, and the ability to rest in another person's presence without fear or shame all become visible through the empath. The attachment is not really about the person alone. It is about what that person awakens. The avoidant sees something in the empath that feels impossible to create within themselves, and that realization makes the connection feel almost irresistible. The fixation grows because it touches a deeper longing for inner balance. It represents the union between emotion and reason, independence and connection, openness and protection. Once this conflict comes to the surface, it cannot simply be ignored. Many avoidants take pride in staying emotionally composed and maintaining control over their inner world. Yet after meeting someone who reaches them at such a profound level, they often discover that control is no longer absolute. Their mind keeps returning to the empath, not only because they miss them, but because something inside has been awakened that refuses to go back to sleep. The relationship itself becomes a place where transformation can happen. It brings hidden patterns into view and forces both people to face parts of themselves they may have avoided. For the avoidant especially, it reveals how delicate the emotional walls truly are. The empath does not force this process. They do not demand change or push for vulnerability. Simply by being present, they become a bridge between the disconnected pieces of the avoidant's inner world. Even when distance is created, the emotional impact remains because the connection is about more than romance. It speaks to a deeper desire for inner wholeness that has existed all along. Avoidants rarely approach emotional relationships in a direct or simple way. Their inner world is often shaped by caution, self-protection, and silent rules meant to keep painful experiences from repeating themselves. When they meet a super empath, someone who naturally understands emotions and responds with patience and grace, they often begin testing the safety of that connection. These tests are not always deliberate acts meant to manipulate or hurt someone. More often, they are responses born from fear and uncertainty. They want to know if the emotional security being offered is real, or if it will disappear like it has in the past. An avoidant may suddenly pull back, stop communicating, become distant, or act emotionally unavailable. Then, consciously or unconsciously, they watch how the other person responds. Their withdrawal serves as both a defense mechanism and a strange invitation. They are looking for evidence that this person is different from those who once caused them pain. The empath, being naturally sensitive to emotional currents, often responds with understanding rather than anger. Instead of becoming reactive or demanding, they offer calmness, patience, and emotional presence. This response can deeply confuse the avoidant. They expect people to leave when they create distance. They expect criticism when they shut down. They assume that showing their imperfections will lead to rejection. Yet the empath does something unexpected. They remain grounded without losing themselves. This experience challenges everything the avoidant believes about relationships. Their growing fixation is not only based on affection, it comes from discovering someone who can hold emotional complexity without punishing it. For many avoidants, that kind of acceptance feels incredibly rare. As a result, the testing may continue, not because they want to create suffering, but because they are searching for certainty in an emotional world that has always felt unpredictable and unsafe. Every time the empath responds with stability rather than abandonment, the avoidant becomes more curious. They notice that their silence does not automatically push this person away. Their emotional distance does not always result in rejection. Instead of confirming old fears, the empath offers a different possibility. That possibility creates both fascination and confusion. The empath begins to symbolize a form of strength the avoidant may never have encountered before. It is not power through control or dominance. It is strength through compassion, patience, and emotional balance. Many avoidants have experienced situations where emotional distance caused others to break down, become angry, or leave entirely. Yet the super empath remains centered. They continue to care without losing their own stability. To the avoidant, this can feel almost mysterious. They wonder how someone can love deeply without falling apart. How can a person stay open-hearted while still maintaining their own sense of self? These questions become difficult to ignore. Over time, the avoidant starts thinking more and more about the empath. They replay conversations, analyze interactions, and quietly wonder what the empath truly thinks about them. They may check from a distance to see if the connection still exists or if the empath is still emotionally present. They rarely speak about these thoughts openly, but internally they become deeply captivated. For someone who has always believed that love must be earned, controlled, or carefully managed, the simple and genuine care offered by the empath feels almost unbelievable. It challenges the rules they have lived by for years. The tests, therefore, are not only about boundaries. They are about something much deeper. They are attempts to answer difficult questions about trust, identity, and whether genuine emotional safety can actually exist between two people. At the heart of it all, many avoidants live in a kind of emotional exile. They create distance not because they do not want connection, but because intimacy threatens the fragile sense of security they built in order to survive the pain of the past. Their longing for closeness remains, even while their fear tells them to keep others at arm's length. And when someone finally arrives who sees beyond those defenses and stays emotionally grounded, the experience can transform everything they thought they knew about love, vulnerability, and themselves. Here is a condensed version at roughly 4,000 characters, while preserving the core message, emotional depth, and overall meaning. For many avoidants, intimacy feels dangerous because it threatens to expose emotions they have spent years keeping under control. Getting close to someone means risking the sense of safety they built through distance and self-protection. So when a super empath enters their life, the connection reaches far beyond simple attraction. They are drawn to the warmth, understanding, and emotional depth the empath offers, often without fully realizing why. Even if the relationship ends, the empath does not disappear from the avoidant's inner world. They remain as a powerful emotional presence rather than a passing memory. On the surface, the avoidant may move forward, focus on work, or build new relationships, but internally they continue returning to the person who made them feel understood in a way no one else had before. Someone who normally relies on logic and emotional distance suddenly finds themselves deeply connected to another person. This bond is not built on dependency, but on emotional resonance and acceptance. The empath never tries to change or rescue them. They simply offer understanding and presence, and that quiet acceptance leaves a lasting mark. Over time, the avoidant may compare other relationships to what they experienced with the empath. Even connections that seem perfect on paper can feel incomplete. What they miss is not just affection or attention, but the sense of peace they felt when they did not have to hide, perform, or protect themselves every moment. These realizations often come later, in silence. They replay old conversations and remember what it felt like to be understood without explanation. Sometimes they even adopt small parts of the empath's approach to life without realizing it. The fixation does not come from anything the empath intentionally did. It comes from what their presence awakened within them. Slowly, the avoidant begins to see that the emotional framework they relied on for years no longer brings the comfort it once did. Independence and distance are no longer enough. The empath represented another way of living, one based on openness, authenticity, and genuine connection. After experiencing that possibility, everything else can seem strangely empty. What once guided them was emotional detachment. Now, there is longing. Not because they suddenly understand intimacy perfectly, but because they have felt the absence of something deeply meaningful. The empath becomes a quiet reference point in their mind, shaping how they view important moments and emotional experiences. This is why the attachment feels so difficult to escape. It reaches into the foundation of how they understand themselves and the world around them. The obsession is not simply about regret or romance. It reflects a much deeper shift within. The walls the avoidant built to keep pain away also kept out healing and connection. The super empath never forced those walls down. Instead, their kindness and understanding allowed hidden emotions to rise to the surface. At first, this creates confusion and resistance, but eventually, it turns into a longing that is hard to explain. What they truly long for is not only the other person, but the version of themselves that existed in that person's presence. The fixation becomes less about love and more about reconnecting with an authentic self that had been buried beneath years of protection and survival. The empath becomes a bridge to that forgotten part of themselves. No matter how much the avoidant tries to move on, the experience remains. It becomes the beginning of a transformation they never expected and may not fully understand. The relationship comes to symbolize a path they once rejected out of fear. After feeling genuinely seen and accepted, returning to complete emotional distance becomes painful. The memories stay alive because they hold a truth about who they are and who they might become. In the end, this is about far more than romance. It is about inner healing and the journey back toward wholeness. The avoidant is not simply holding on to another person. They are holding on to the possibility of becoming someone who no longer needs to run from vulnerability, someone who can finally welcome home the parts of themselves they left behind long ago.